Ma'am, this seat isn't for people like you. Move to the back where you belong.
Captain Jake Morrison's voice cut through the first-class cabin of Pacific Airways Flight 447 like a judge delivering a verdict. No hesitation, no doubt. Just cold authority wrapped in a crisp uniform and 22 years of unchecked arrogance. The black woman in seat 2A didn't flinch. She looked up from her leather portfolio with eyes that had seen this script before. Her name was Zara Williams, and in exactly 14 minutes, she would ground Captain Morrison's career permanently. Before we dive into this story of quiet power and instant justice, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. Now let's step aboard Pacific Airways Flight 447 at LAX Terminal 6, where prejudice, power, and karma were about to collide at 35,000 feet. The Boeing 767 sat gleaming on the tarmac under the harsh California sun. Inside the first-class cabin buzzed with the quiet efficiency of pre-flight preparation. 16 leather seats arranged in a 2-2 configuration, each one representing privileged comfort, and the assumption that respect came automatically with the price of admission. Seat 2A was the crown jewel of the cabin. Premium window position, maximum privacy, extra storage space. The kind of seat that airlines reserved for their most valued customers, or sold at premium prices to those willing to pay for the very best. Zara Williams had paid full price. $4,847 for a round-trip ticket to Denver. But as she sat quietly reading through quarterly financial reports, her simple black sweater and dark jeans told a different story to those who judged books by their covers. Captain Jake Morrison emerged from the cockpit at 3:22 p.m., his silver hair perfectly styled, his uniform pressed to military precision. 22 years of flying had built his reputation on two things: exceptional skill in the air and absolute authority on the ground. He commanded respect through intimidation, loyalty through fear, and results through an iron fist wrapped in regulation procedures. Today, that approach would destroy him. Morrison's eyes swept the first-class cabin with practiced efficiency. 14 passengers already seated, 2 more boarding. His mental checklist ticked through familiar faces: the tech executive in 1A, the hedge fund manager in 3B, the pharmaceutical sales director in 4A. People who belonged in first class, people who looked the part. Then his gaze landed on seat 2A. The sight stopped him cold. A black woman in casual clothes, reading what appeared to be business documents, occupying the seat he had specifically promised to his longtime friend, Greg Patterson. The seat that should have remained blocked until Greg's arrival. Something had gone wrong. Someone had made a mistake. And Jake Morrison was about to correct it with the full weight of his authority. He approached seat 2A with the measured steps of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The cabin grew quieter as passengers sensed the shift in atmosphere. Conversations paused. Eyes turned. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation. Morrison stopped directly beside Zara's seat, casting a shadow across her reading material. He waited for her to acknowledge his presence, to look up with the deference he expected from passengers. When she didn't immediately respond, continuing to read her documents, his jaw tightened. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a man unaccustomed to being ignored. Zara finished the paragraph she was reading, then slowly looked up. Her expression was calm, professional, completely unruffled by his imposing presence. She met his gaze with steady eyes that held no fear, no intimidation, no recognition of his assumed superiority. "Can I help you, Captain?" she asked, her voice pleasant but firm. Morrison blinked. He wasn't used to passengers looking him in the eye with such composure, such complete lack of deference. Most people either fawned over his uniform or shrank from his authority. This woman did neither. "Ma'am," he began, his tone dripping with condescending politeness, "I believe you're in the wrong seat. This seat is reserved for a VIP guest of the airline." Zara's expression didn't change. She reached into her portfolio and withdrew her boarding pass, holding it up so the light caught the first-class designation clearly. My boarding pass says Seat 2A. I paid for Seat 2A. Therefore, I'm sitting in Seat 2A. The simplicity of her logic should have ended the conversation. But Jake Morrison wasn't a man who backed down from challenges, especially not from someone who clearly didn't understand the hierarchy of his aircraft. "Look," he said, leaning closer, his voice dropping to what he imagined was a reasonable tone. "I don't know how you got that ticket. Maybe a system glitch. Maybe you used some miles. But we have a situation here. I have a personal friend, Mr. Greg Patterson, boarding in exactly 3 minutes. He requires this seat." Zara closed her portfolio and placed it carefully in her lap. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet strength that somehow filled the entire cabin. "Captain Morrison, that sounds like a scheduling problem for Mr. Patterson. Not for me." The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. The businessman in 3B stopped reading his newspaper. The pharmaceutical executive paused her phone conversation. Everyone was watching now, sensing that something significant was unfolding in the quiet space between Seat 2A and the captain's uniform. Morrison's face began to flush. In 22 years of flying, no passenger had ever spoken to him with such calm defiance. No one had ever challenged his authority so directly, so publicly. The eyes of his first-class passengers were on him now. His reputation, his command presence, his very identity as captain were being tested by a woman who clearly didn't understand her place. He straightened to his full height, letting his uniform and his rank do the talking. "Ma'am, it's not a scheduling problem. It's a hierarchy problem. And on this plane, I'm at the top of it." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, passengers held their breath. Phones began to appear, and the first sparks of what would become a wildfire of social media attention started to ignite. Zara Williams looked up at Captain Jake Morrison with eyes that had built a $3 billion empire. Eyes that had faced down hostile takeovers, corrupt competitors, and entitled men who thought authority came from volume rather than vision. "Captain," she said quietly, "you just made the biggest mistake of your career." Morrison smiled, confident in his power, certain of his control. He had no idea that the woman sitting calmly in Seat 2A had purchased his airline 48 hours ago. He had no idea that she owned every rivet, every seat, every regulation manual that governed his employment. He was about to find out. 48 hours earlier, Zara Williams had signed the final documents that made her the majority owner of Pacific Airways. The acquisition had taken 14 months of careful planning, detailed financial analysis, and delicate negotiations with a failing airline desperate for a lifeline. Phoenix Capital Partners, her private equity firm, had paid $8 billion for a company worth half that amount on paper but invaluable in potential. The deal hadn't made headlines yet. The press release was scheduled for Monday morning, giving Zara a weekend window to conduct what she called a cultural stress test. She wanted to see how Pacific Airways treated its customers when management thought no one was watching. She wanted to experience the real company culture, not the sanitized version presented in boardrooms and quarterly reports. What she discovered would exceed even her worst expectations. Zara had built Phoenix Capital from a single office in downtown Phoenix 23 years ago. She started with $50,000 in savings, a Harvard MBA, and an unshakable belief that businesses succeeded when they treated people with dignity and respect. By age 30, she was managing $100 million in assets. By 40, she controlled $1.2 billion. Today, at 46, Phoenix Capital Partners was worth $2 billion and had a reputation for transforming struggling companies into industry leaders. Her success hadn't come easily. Zara remembered every boardroom where she was the only black face, every negotiation where opponents underestimated her because of her gender and race, every deal where she had to prove herself twice as hard for half the recognition. Those experiences had forged her into a leader who valued substance over style, results over rhetoric. But it was a personal experience from 23 years ago that had shaped her approach to acquisitions. Fresh out of Harvard, wearing her best interview suit, she had boarded a flight to Seattle for a crucial meeting with potential investors. Despite holding a first-class ticket, the gate agent had looked her up and down and suggested she might be more comfortable in economy class. The flight attendant had questioned whether she could really afford the champagne service. The pilot himself had joked loudly with other passengers that some people tried to sneak into first class by dressing up. That humiliation had cost her the investment meeting. By the time she reached Seattle, she was too rattled to present effectively. The investors passed on her proposal, delaying her business launch by 6 months. She never forgot how it felt to be judged, dismissed, and diminished, based on appearance rather than ability. Now, sitting in Seat 2A of Pacific Airways Flight 447, Zara was about to ensure that no other passenger would experience what she had endured decades ago. Los Angeles International Airport Terminal 6 hummed with its usual controlled chaos. At 2:45 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, the Pacific Airways departure area buzzed with business travelers, vacation families, and the endless stream of people who kept America's aviation industry aloft. Flight 447 to Denver was running on schedule. Boarding would begin at 3:15 p.m. with departure planned for 4:00 p.m. The Pacific Airways VIP lounge occupied premium real estate on the terminal's upper level. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the tarmac where ground crews serviced aircraft under the brilliant California sun. Inside, business travelers worked on laptops, while others relaxed in leather chairs, taking advantage of complimentary refreshments and Wi-Fi access. Zara had spent the previous hour in the lounge observing staff interactions with passengers. She watched how agents responded to questions, how service varied based on passenger appearance, how problems were resolved differently for different types of customers. She took mental notes that would inform policy changes in the coming weeks. The observations weren't encouraging. She noticed how the lounge attendant, a young man named Timothy Rodriguez, brightened considerably when serving well-dressed white passengers, but became noticeably cooler when helping others. She observed how gate agents spent extra time assisting passengers who looked the part while rushing through check-ins for those who didn't meet some unspoken visual standard. Most troubling was a conversation she overheard between two senior flight attendants discussing passenger manifest. One mentioned that Captain Morrison had requested Seat 2A be held for his friend Mr. Patterson, despite the seat being sold and confirmed to another passenger. The attendant had shrugged, saying, "Jake gets what Jake wants. We'll handle it at the gate." That conversation had convinced Zara to claim her rightful seat and see how Pacific Airways handled the situation. She suspected the outcome wouldn't reflect well on the company's values or training programs. Flight 447's Boeing 767 represented the newer segment of Pacific Airways' aging fleet. The aircraft was well-maintained but showed signs of deferred upgrades and cost-cutting measures that had plagued the airline's previous management. First class offered 16 seats in a 2-2 configuration, each providing lie-flat capability for longer routes. Business class held 36 seats, while economy accommodated 180 passengers in a 3-3-3 layout. The first-class cabin aimed for understated elegance, but fell short of the luxury standards set by major carriers. Seats were comfortable, but not exceptional. Service was adequate, but lacked the personal touch that justified premium pricing. The overall impression was of a company treading water rather than swimming toward excellence. Seat 2A was positioned perfectly for Zara's purposes. The premium window location offered privacy for work, while providing clear sight lines throughout the cabin. She could observe passenger interactions, staff behavior, and pilot conduct without appearing intrusive or obvious. As she settled into the seat at 3:05 p.m., Zara placed her leather portfolio on the side table and withdrew a thick folder labeled Pacific Airways Operational Assessment. The documents inside represented months of research into the airline's culture, customer service records, employee satisfaction surveys, and incident reports. The data painted a concerning picture of a company where leadership prioritized personal relationships over passenger rights, where staff feared challenging authority even when witnessing inappropriate behavior. Today's flight would provide the final evidence Zara needed to justify the comprehensive changes she planned to implement. David Martinez occupied seat 3B, his laptop open to TikTok's creator dashboard, where his travel content reached 850,000 dedicated followers. At 38, David had turned his love of travel into a successful social media career by documenting both the glamorous and problematic aspects of modern aviation. His honest reviews of airlines, airports, and travel experiences had earned him a reputation for unbiased reporting and instant credibility with his audience. David had noticed the tension building around seat 2A from the moment Captain Morrison emerged from the cockpit. As a frequent traveler and keen observer of airline dynamics, he recognized the signs of an approaching conflict. His phone was already positioned discreetly, camera app open and ready to document whatever unfolded. His followers trusted him to share authentic moments, both positive and negative, from his travels. Rebecca Thompson sat in seat 1A, her iPhone propped against her water glass, as she prepared for her weekly Instagram live session with her 45,000 followers. A tech executive at a major consulting firm, Rebecca had built her following by sharing insights about business travel, workplace diversity, and professional development. Her audience consisted primarily of working professionals who appreciated her honest takes on corporate culture and travel experiences. Rebecca had been following the conversation between the captain and the passenger in 2A with growing concern. As a black woman herself, she recognized the subtle but unmistakable signs of discriminatory treatment. Her audience had previously responded strongly to her content about bias in professional settings, and she sensed this situation would resonate powerfully with her followers. Tommy Rodriguez, 28, sat in seat 4A with his phone camera ready to record for his YouTube channel, Real Talk Airways. A college student studying journalism at UCLA, Tommy had started the channel to document his experiences as a first-generation college student who frequently flew home to visit family in Chicago. His honest, unpolished style had attracted 125,000 subscribers who appreciated his authentic perspective on travel as a young Hispanic man. Tommy had immediately recognized the potential significance of the brewing confrontation. His journalistic instincts told him this was exactly the kind of story that needed to be documented and shared. His audience trusted him to shine light on injustices they might face in their own lives. Sarah Johnson, a 33-year-old marketing director from Seattle, occupied seat 3A with her laptop open to quarterly budget reports. A mother of 2 young daughters, Sarah had built her career while navigating the challenges of work-life balance in corporate America. She frequently traveled for business and had developed a keen eye for how service industry employees treated different types of customers. Sarah wasn't a content creator or social media influencer, but she understood the power of witnessing and speaking up when she observed unfair treatment. As a white woman who had seen bias directed at colleagues and friends, she felt a responsibility to use her voice when others faced discrimination. Maria Santos, 34, stood near the galley entrance, watching the interaction between Captain Morrison and the passenger in 2A with growing anxiety. As a senior flight attendant with 8 years of Pacific Airways experience, Maria had witnessed numerous conflicts between passengers and crew members. She understood the unwritten rules that governed airline hierarchy. Captains were rarely challenged. Passenger complaints were often dismissed, and staff members who spoke up faced potential retaliation. Maria had heard Captain Morrison's request to hold seat 2A for his friend Mr. Patterson. She knew the seat had been legitimately sold to another passenger, but she also knew that Morrison's influence extended throughout the airline's operational structure. Challenging him could jeopardize her career advancement, her performance reviews, even her job security. But watching Morrison's treatment of the professional black woman in 2A triggered memories of Maria's own experiences with discrimination. As a Hispanic woman, working in an industry dominated by white male leadership, she had faced subtle but persistent bias throughout her career. She understood the isolation, frustration, and helplessness that came with being judged unfairly based on appearance, rather than capability. Luis Fernandez, 42, observed the developing situation from his position near the aircraft door, where he greeted boarding passengers. With 15 years of flight attendant experience, Luis had developed an instinct for recognizing situations that could escalate into serious problems. The tension in Captain Morrison's posture and the calm defiance in the passenger's response set off alarm bells in his experienced mind. Luis had worked with Morrison on dozens of flights and understood the captain's personality perfectly. Morrison demanded absolute deference from passengers and crew alike. He used his authority to intimidate rather than lead, creating an atmosphere of fear rather than respect. Luis had seen Morrison's treatment of passengers who didn't meet his undefined standards of appearance or behavior, and he recognized the warning signs of an approaching crisis. Ashley Miller, 29, stood frozen near the beverage cart as she watched Captain Morrison's confrontation with the passenger in 2A. With only 3 years of flight attendant experience, Ashley still felt uncertain about airline protocols and crew hierarchies. She understood that captains held ultimate authority on aircraft, but she also sensed that Morrison's behavior crossed ethical boundaries that went beyond standard operating procedures. Ashley wanted to intervene to point out that the passenger clearly held a valid boarding pass for seat 2A, but her limited experience and fear of confrontation kept her silent. She had witnessed other crew members face Morrison's wrath when they questioned his decisions, and she couldn't afford to jeopardize her position. Carlos Mendoza, 45, supervised boarding procedures from his position at the jet bridge entrance. As a gate agent with 12 years of Pacific Airways experience, Carlos had processed thousands of passengers and resolved countless boarding disputes. He possessed intimate knowledge of airline policies, passenger rights, and crew protocols. Carlos had watched Captain Morrison board the aircraft 20 minutes earlier with his usual swagger and entitlement. He had also observed the passenger in question, a professional black woman who had presented valid documentation and followed all boarding procedures correctly. When he noticed Morrison's aggressive posture through the aircraft windows, Carlos began preparing incident reports and supervisor notifications that might become necessary. Captain Jake Morrison represented everything wrong with Pacific Airways' corporate culture. At 52, he embodied an old-school aviation mentality that confused authority with arrogance, leadership with intimidation. His 22 years of commercial flying had built a reputation based on technical competence and absolute control rather than collaborative leadership or passenger service excellence. Morrison's background as a former military pilot had shaped his approach to civilian aviation in problematic ways. In the Air Force hierarchy was absolute orders were not questioned, and authority flowed clearly from rank and position. When Morrison transitioned to commercial aviation, he had never adjusted his leadership style to accommodate the service-oriented nature of passenger airline operations. His record with Pacific Airways showed consistent patterns of problematic behavior that had been overlooked or excused by previous management. Passenger complaints about his condescending treatment were regularly dismissed. Crew members' reports about his intimidating behavior were buried in personnel files. His technical skills as a pilot provided cover for interpersonal failures that should have triggered intervention years earlier. Morrison's relationship with Greg Patterson exemplified his skewed priorities. Patterson was a real estate developer with significant personal wealth, but no official connection to Pacific Airways operations. Their friendship had begun 5 years earlier when Morrison had provided exceptional service during a flight delay, personally ensuring Patterson reached an important business meeting on time. Since then, Patterson had received unofficial VIP treatment on Morrison's flights, including seat upgrades, priority boarding, and special accommodations that violated airline policies. Morrison's current mindset viewed the situation in Seat 2A as a simple hierarchy correction. In his worldview, people belonged in clearly defined categories based on appearance, wealth, and social status. The black woman in casual clothes obviously didn't belong in first class, regardless of her ticket status. His friend Patterson, a successful white businessman in expensive clothes, clearly did belong in premium accommodations. The captain's ego and sense of entitlement had blinded him to both airline regulations and basic human dignity. He genuinely believed his authority extended to rearranging passenger seating based on his personal preferences and prejudices. He viewed passenger resistance as insubordination rather than legitimate assertion of purchased rights. Morrison had no idea that his actions were being recorded by multiple passengers, or that his behavior would trigger consequences extending far beyond a single flight. His narrow focus on maintaining personal authority prevented him from recognizing the broader implications of publicly humiliating a passenger based on racial bias. Most critically, Morrison remained completely unaware that the woman he was attempting to intimidate had purchased his employer 48 hours earlier and possessed the authority to terminate his career with a single phone call. His assumption that appearance indicated authority was about to destroy everything he had built over more than 2 decades of flying. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the toxic culture pervading Pacific Airways and demonstrate the consequences when prejudice collided with real power wielded by someone who understood that true authority came from service rather than domination. The silence in the first-class cabin stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Captain Morrison stood beside seat 2A, his uniform crisp under the overhead lights, his authority radiating from every pressed crease and polished button. 22 years of commanding aircraft and passengers had taught him that hesitation was weakness, that backing down meant losing control. Zara Williams remained seated, her portfolio closed, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had faced hostile takeovers worth billions of dollars, navigated boardrooms filled with men who questioned her competence, and built an empire despite barriers designed to keep her out. A captain's intimidation tactics were merely another Tuesday for her. Ma'am, Morrison said, his voice taking on the tone he reserved for passengers who needed correction. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. This is first class. These seats are reserved for our most valued customers, people who understand the privilege of flying with Pacific Airways. The words carried clear implications without crossing into explicitly discriminatory language. Morrison had perfected this approach over years of practice using coded phrases that communicated his message while providing plausible deniability if questioned later. Zara's expression didn't change. Captain Morrison, I understand exactly where I am. Seat 2A, First Class Pacific Airways Flight 447 to Denver. I paid $4,847 for this ticket. I have every right to sit here. Morrison's jaw tightened at her direct response. Passengers were supposed to defer to his authority, apologize for the confusion, accept his guidance gratefully. This woman's calm confidence unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Look, sweetheart, he said, letting condescension drip from the endearment. I'm sure you're more comfortable in coach. Economy Plus has extra legroom, probably more suited to your needs. Brittany here can help you gather your things and find your proper seat. He gestured toward Maria Santos, deliberately using the wrong name as another small assertion of dominance. Maria shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the impossible position Morrison was placing her in. She knew the passenger held a valid first-class ticket, but challenging the captain publicly would invite his retaliation. My name is Maria Captain, she said quietly, and this passenger's boarding pass is valid for seat 2A. Morrison's face flushed slightly. He wasn't accustomed to crew members correcting him in front of passengers, even on minor details. Maria, then. Please escort this lady to her appropriate seating. Zara finally stood not to leave, but to face Morrison at eye level. At 5'8", she matched his height, and her calm presence somehow filled the space between them with quiet authority. Captain, I'm going to say this once more slowly so there's no confusion. I am Zara Williams. This is my seat. I purchased it legally. I'm not moving. The businessman in seat 3B looked up from his newspaper. The tech executive in 1A paused her phone call. Conversations throughout the cabin began to fade as passengers sensed the escalating tension. Phone screens began to glow as people prepared to document what increasingly looked like a significant confrontation. Morrison stepped closer, using his physical presence to intimidate. Ma'am, let me explain how this works. On my aircraft, I make decisions about passenger placement. I have a situation where a valued customer needs this specific seat. You'll be upgraded to our premium economy section with my compliments. Your aircraft? Zara repeated, her voice carrying just enough emphasis to plant doubt without revealing anything. Interesting choice of words, Captain. Morrison missed the subtle warning entirely. Yes, my aircraft. I'm responsible for every passenger, every decision, every aspect of this flight. and I've decided that Mr. Patterson requires Seat 2A for important business reasons. Mr. Patterson, Zara said thoughtfully, would be the real estate developer from Beverly Hills. Your golf partner and frequent beneficiary of unofficial upgrades that violate Pacific Airways policy. Morrison's confidence wavered slightly. How did this passenger know about Patterson's background or their personal relationship? How did she know about the unofficial accommodations he provided? I don't know where you're getting your information, but passenger accommodations are at the captain's discretion. Are they? Zara asked. According to Pacific Airways Customer Service Policy Manual, Section 4, 3 passenger seating changes can only be made for safety, security, or operational reasons. Personal favors don't qualify. Morrison stared at her. Very few passengers knew airline policy manuals in that kind of detail. Even fewer would quote specific sections during confrontations. Something about this situation felt wrong, but his ego prevented him from backing down. Lady, I don't care what manual you think you've read. This is reality. Mr. Patterson is boarding in 2 minutes. He needs this seat. You're moving to coach. End of discussion. Zara smiled for the first time since Morrison approached her seat. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the expression of someone who had just heard exactly what she needed to hear. Captain Morrison, you just made this very easy for me. Around them, passengers had stopped pretending to read or work. David Martinez in 3B had his phone positioned to capture the conversation. Rebecca Thompson in 1A was already going live on Instagram. Tommy Rodriguez in 4A held his camera steady, documenting every word for his YouTube channel. Sarah Johnson in 3A watched with growing outrage at Morrison's treatment of the passenger. Morrison sensed the shift in cabin atmosphere, but misread it completely. He interpreted the attention as support for his authority, rather than disapproval of his behavior. Folks, sorry for the disruption. We'll have this sorted out quickly and get everyone on their way to Denver. Several passengers exchanged glances. The assumption that they supported his actions revealed how disconnected Morrison was from basic human decency. Most people recognized discriminatory behavior when they witnessed it regardless of their personal backgrounds. Captain Zara said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the cabin, before you continue embarrassing yourself and this airline, perhaps you should check your company communications. I believe you might have some important messages waiting. Morrison's phone had been buzzing intermittently in his pocket, but he'd ignored it during the confrontation. Captains received constant updates about weather routing and operational changes. Nothing seemed urgent enough to interrupt his handling of the seating situation. Ma'am, company communications can wait until I've resolved this passenger placement issue. Can they? Zara asked. Even communications about changes in company ownership. Morrison froze. His hand moved instinctively toward his phone, then stopped. Company ownership changes would be announced through official channels, not mentioned casually by passengers making seating demands. The woman was obviously bluffing, trying to distract him from the matter at hand. Nice try, Morrison said, but corporate headquarters would have notified all pilots about any ownership changes days in advance. You're not going to manipulate me with fake corporate news? Zara's smile widened. Check your phone, Captain. I'll wait. David Martinez had built his TikTok following by documenting authentic travel experiences, both positive and negative. His 850,000 followers trusted him to share honest assessments of airlines, airports, and travel situations. The confrontation unfolding in Seat 2A was exactly the kind of content his audience needed to see. He opened TikTok Live, positioning his phone to capture both the captain and the passenger while keeping himself out of the frame. Within seconds, viewers began joining the stream. Okay, travel family, I'm live from Pacific Airways Flight 447, and y'all are not going to believe what's happening right now, David whispered into his phone. This pilot is literally trying to force a black woman out of her paid first-class seat to make room for his buddy. The comments section exploded immediately. Is this really happening? Record everything. Call the news. This is discrimination. Share this everywhere. David continued his whispered commentary as viewers flooded in. She's being completely calm and professional, showing her valid boarding pass, but this captain keeps insisting she move to coach. This is straight-up racial profiling. The viewer count climbed rapidly. 500, 1,000, 2, 500 people watching live as the confrontation continued. David's followers began sharing the stream across their own social media platforms, creating a viral ripple effect that would soon reach far beyond his immediate audience. Rebecca Thompson had planned to host her usual Thursday afternoon Instagram live session about travel tips for business professionals. Instead, she found herself documenting discrimination in real time for her 45,000 followers. "I'm going to interrupt today's scheduled content because something is happening on this flight that you all need to see," she said to her camera, keeping her voice low but clear. "A black woman is being harassed by a Pacific Airways pilot who's trying to remove her from her paid first-class seat." Rebecca's audience consisted primarily of working professionals, many of them people of color who had faced similar discrimination in workplace and travel situations. Her comments filled with outrage and support. "Document everything, Rebecca. This is why I avoid certain airlines. That woman is handling this perfectly. Screen record in case they delete. Contact the NAACP." "What's particularly disturbing," Rebecca continued, "is how this captain seems to think his authority extends to rearranging passengers based on his personal preferences. This woman has done nothing wrong except exist while black in first class." Tommy Rodriguez felt his journalistic training kick in as he watched the situation escalate. His YouTube channel, Real Talk Airways, had gained a following by exposing problems in the aviation industry from a passenger perspective. This confrontation was the kind of story that needed to be told, documented, and shared widely. He started recording on his phone while live tweeting updates to his 25,000 Twitter followers. "Thread witnessing discrimination on Pacific Air Flight 447. Captain trying to remove black passenger from her paid first-class seat. Recording everything. Hashtag Pacific Airways. Shame. Shaw Aviation. Civil rights. 1. Captain claims seat is reserved for VIP guest, but passenger has valid boarding pass. Using coded language like more comfortable in coach and proper seating. Classic discrimination tactics. 2. Other passengers watching in shock. This is 2024, not 1924. Pacific Air needs to address this captain's behavior immediately. More updates coming. 3. Tommy's followers began retweeting the thread immediately. Aviation journalists, civil rights activists, and travel bloggers started following the story as it developed in real time. Sarah Johnson wasn't a content creator, but she understood the importance of bearing witness to injustice. As a white woman in corporate America, she had seen how bias affected her colleagues and friends. She felt a responsibility to speak up when she observed discrimination. She opened her phone's voice memo app and began recording her observations. Thursday, 3:25 p.m. Pacific Airways Flight 447. Witnessing a black female passenger being harassed by the captain who wants to give her paid seat to his white male friend. The woman is completely professional while the captain is being aggressive and discriminatory. Sarah's recording would later serve as additional evidence of Morrison's behavior, providing yet another perspective on the confrontation from a witness who had no social media following or content creation agenda. Her testimony would carry weight precisely because she had no ulterior motive for documenting the incident. Around the cabin, other passengers watched with growing discomfort. Some pulled out phones to record. Others whispered among themselves about the obvious unfairness of Morrison's demands. A few considered speaking up, but hesitated, unsure how to intervene effectively. The atmosphere in first class had transformed from typical pre-flight calm to electric tension. Everyone understood they were witnessing something significant, something that would have consequences extending far beyond a single flight. Morrison remained oblivious to the documentation happening around him. His focus stayed locked on what he perceived as a passenger refusing to follow his legitimate instructions. He couldn't see the forest of phones capturing his every word, the live streams broadcasting his behavior to thousands of viewers, or the social media posts that were already beginning to trend. Ma'am Morrison said, his voice rising slightly with frustration. "I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and follow Maria to your reassigned seat. Mr. Patterson will be boarding momentarily, and he requires this specific location for important business meetings during the flight." Zara remained perfectly still. Captain, what specific business meetings require Seat 2A that couldn't be conducted from any other first-class seat? Morrison's face reddened. That's confidential passenger information. I don't discuss one customer's needs with another customer. Interesting, Zara said. Because Mr. Patterson's flight record shows his last 5 Pacific Airways trips were pleasure travel, not business. Golf tournaments in Scottsdale, wine tours in Napa, fishing trips to Alaska. What business meetings could he possibly have at 35,000 feet that justify violating federal regulations? Morrison's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. How could this passenger possibly know Patterson's travel history? That information was supposed to be confidential, accessible only to airline employees with specific clearance levels. I don't know where you're getting false information about Mr. Patterson's travel, Morrison said weakly. But passenger privacy laws prevent me from discussing details. Privacy laws, Zara repeated thoughtfully. The same laws that should prevent you from sharing my seating information with other passengers or discussing my ticket status publicly or speculating about my ability to afford first-class accommodations. Morrison realized he was losing control of the conversation. The passenger's knowledge of airline policies, regulations, and even confidential passenger data suggested connections or background he didn't understand. But backing down now in front of witnesses and crew members would destroy his authority permanently. Ma'am, I'm done discussing this. You're moving to economy, or I'm calling airport security to remove you from the aircraft. The threat hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Around the cabin, passengers shifted uncomfortably. David's TikTok live viewers spiked past 5,000 as people shared the stream. Rebecca's Instagram audience approached 2,000 concurrent viewers. Tommy's Twitter thread had been retweeted hundreds of times. Zara Williams looked up at Captain Morrison with the calm expression of someone who had just received exactly the evidence she needed. Captain, please call security. I'd very much like to speak with them. Morrison's confidence began to waver as he processed Zara's unexpected response to his security threat. In his experience, passengers backed down when faced with the possibility of being removed from aircraft. The prospect of missed flights, travel disruptions, and public embarrassment usually ended resistance immediately. This woman's calm invitation to involve security suggested either complete confidence in her position or dangerous delusion about airline authority. Morrison couldn't determine which possibility was more concerning. Ma'am, I want to be very clear about what you're asking for, Morrison said, his voice taking on the tone of a parent explaining consequences to a stubborn child. If I call security, you'll be removed from this aircraft. You'll miss your flight to Denver. You'll be flagged in our security system. Future travel on Pacific Airways will be complicated. Zara's expression didn't change. Captain Morrison, please call security. I insist. The businessman in 3B lowered his newspaper completely, no longer pretending disinterest. The tech executive in 1A ended her phone call to focus entirely on the confrontation. Luis Fernandez moved closer from his position near the aircraft door, sensing the situation was approaching a critical point. Morrison pulled his phone from his pocket but hesitated before dialing. Something about the passenger's demeanor felt wrong. Confident passengers usually threatened lawsuits or demanded to speak with managers. They didn't calmly invite security involvement while seated in disputed seats. Last chance, Morrison said. Move to your assigned economy seat, and we'll consider this a simple misunderstanding. Continue refusing my instructions, and you'll be dealing with airport police. My assigned seat is 2A. Zara replied evenly. I have the boarding pass, the credit card receipt, and the confirmation email to prove it. Please proceed with your security call. David Martinez's TikTok live audience had exploded past 10,000 viewers as word spread across social media. His comment section moved too quickly to read, "She's about to end this man's career. Plot twist coming. I can feel it. This woman knows something he doesn't. Team passenger all the way. Pacific Airways about to have problems." Rebecca Thompson's Instagram Live reached 3,000 concurrent viewers, many of them sharing the stream to their own stories and feeds. Her professional audience understood workplace dynamics and power structures, and many sensed the captain was walking into a trap. "Something about this feels different," Rebecca whispered to her camera. "This woman is too calm, too confident. She knows something this captain doesn't know." Tommy Rodriguez continued his Twitter thread while recording video. Update captain, now threatening to call security to remove passenger from her paid seat. Passenger wants him to call security. This is about to get very interesting. Pacific Air 4. As Morrison finally began dialing security, a new figure appeared in the first-class cabin. Greg Patterson, 55, immaculately dressed in a custom-tailored suit, strode through the aisle like he owned the aircraft. His platinum watch caught the overhead lights as he surveyed the cabin, clearly expecting to find seat 2A empty and waiting. Patterson's arrival changed the dynamic immediately. Here was Morrison's VIP friend, the man whose accommodation had triggered this entire confrontation. His presence validated Morrison's authority while demonstrating the reasonableness of his request. Jake Patterson called out cheerfully, spotting the captain near seat 2A. "Thanks for holding my seat. Traffic from Beverly Hills was murder, but I made it." Patterson stopped beside Morrison, noticing Zara for the first time. His smile faltered slightly as he processed the situation. "Oh, I thought you said 2A would be available." Morrison's confidence returned with Patterson's presence. Here was proof of his legitimate authority, evidence that important passengers relied on his personal service. "Greg, we're just resolving a small seating confusion. The young lady will be moving to economy momentarily." Patterson looked Zara up and down with the casual dismissal of someone accustomed to getting his way through wealth and connections. "I'm sure she'll be more comfortable back there anyway." "More her. Speed." The coded language wasn't lost on anyone in the cabin. David's viewers erupted in outrage. Rebecca's audience began demanding boycotts. Tommy's Twitter thread went viral as aviation journalists and civil rights activists shared his updates. Zara stood slowly, not to leave, but to face both men directly. At her full height, she commanded the space between them with quiet authority that seemed to diminish their bluster. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the cabin, "allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Zara Williams, CEO of Phoenix Capital Partners." Neither man reacted to the name or title, confirming Zara's suspicion that they were unaware of the acquisition. Morrison had been too focused on flight operations to pay attention to corporate communications. Patterson lived in a bubble of real estate deals and personal networking that rarely intersected with aviation industry news. Ms. Williams Morrison said dismissively, "I don't care what your title is. On this aircraft, I'm the authority. Mr. Patterson requires seat 2A. "Why?" Zara asked simply. Patterson laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Why?" "Because I asked for it. Because Jake and I have an arrangement. Because I spend more money with this airline than you probably make in a year." The casual cruelty of his assumption hung in the air like poison gas. Patterson had looked at Zara's casual clothes and dark skin and calculated her worth automatically, confidently, wrongly. "Mr. Patterson," Zara said, "how much money do you think I make in a year?" Patterson shrugged. "I don't know. 50,075. Whatever it is, I guarantee I've spent more than that on Pacific Airways flights alone." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's why Mr. Patterson receives VIP treatment. Loyal customers who support the airline deserve special accommodations." Zara pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped the screen once. "Interesting perspective, gentlemen. Let me share some numbers with you." While Morrison and Patterson congratulated themselves on their handling of the situation, the world beyond the aircraft cabin was erupting in digital outrage. David Martinez's TikTok Live had reached 15,000 concurrent viewers, with hundreds of thousands more watching shared clips across multiple platforms. The hashtag #PacificAirwaysShame began trending on Twitter as Tommy Rodriguez's thread spread through aviation and civil rights communities. Verified accounts belonging to travel journalists, civil rights attorneys, and diversity advocates started amplifying the story. Aviation Today, developing story. Pacific Air pilot threatening to remove black passenger from paid first-class seat to accommodate friend. Multiple live streams documenting incident. Investigating. Travel advocate. This is why we need stronger passenger protections. What Pacific Air is doing right now is discrimination period. RT to spread awareness. NOACP. We are monitoring reports of discrimination on Pacific Air Flight 447. All passengers deserve equal treatment regardless of race. We'll be taking action. Rebecca Thompson's Instagram Live audience had grown to 5,000 viewers, with her comment section filled with outrage and support for the passenger. This is exactly why I document travel experiences as a black woman. That woman is about to end these men's whole careers. Screenshot everything before they try to cover it up. Rebecca, please get her contact info. She needs legal support. The viral momentum was building exponentially. TikTok users were downloading and resharing clips from the live streams, adding their own commentary and outrage. Instagram stories filled with shared footage and calls for boycotts. Twitter threads dissecting airline discrimination policies trended nationally. Pacific Airways' social media team, monitoring brand mentions from their corporate office, watched in horror as their company's name spread across platforms associated with discrimination and bias. Emergency protocols activated as PR managers scrambled to respond to the crisis. Pacific Airways. We are aware of reports regarding Flight 447 and are investigating the situation. We do not tolerate discrimination and are committed to treating all passengers fairly. The official response posted within minutes of the hashtag beginning to trend only fueled more outrage. Investigating. It's happening live on multiple streams. Your pilot is discriminating. Right now. Too late for PR spin. We have video evidence. Actions speak louder than tweets. Aviation industry insiders began sharing their own experiences with Pacific Airways culture. Former flight crew worked for Pacific Air, 2018 to 2022. This behavior from Captain Morrison doesn't surprise me. Culture of discrimination was well known among staff. Glad someone's finally exposing it. Airline union flight crews deserve protection from passengers and from discriminatory management. What we're seeing on Flight 447 is unacceptable from any airline. The story jumped from social media to traditional news outlets as television producers and online journalists realized they were watching a discrimination incident unfold in real time with multiple video angles. CNN's transportation correspondent tweeted multiple sources confirming discrimination incident on Pacific Air Flight 447, obtaining video footage for tonight's broadcast. MSNBC assigned a producer to monitor the live streams and prepare coverage for their evening programming. Local Los Angeles news stations began dispatching crews to LAX, hoping to intercept passengers when the flight returned to the gate. The speed of digital communication meant that Zara Williams's confrontation with Captain Morrison was becoming a national story, while the participants remained largely unaware of the attention they had attracted. Inside the aircraft cabin, Morrison and Patterson continued their attempt to intimidate Zara into vacating her seat, oblivious to the fact that their words and actions were being broadcast to tens of thousands of viewers and would soon reach millions more through news coverage and social media amplification. Luis Fernandez, monitoring passenger reactions from his position near the aircraft door, noticed the unusual number of phones recording the confrontation. His experience with viral incidents on flights had taught him that widespread documentation usually preceded significant consequences for crew members and airlines. He quietly activated his emergency communication protocol, sending a discreet alert to ground crew supervisors that Flight 447 was experiencing a significant passenger incident that might require management intervention. His message would prove prophetic, as corporate executives were already receiving urgent briefings about the social media crisis erupting around their airline. Maria Santos watched the escalating confrontation with growing anxiety. Her 8 years of flight attendant experience had taught her to recognize situations that could destroy careers and companies. Captain Morrison's behavior was crossing every line of professional conduct, but his authority structure made intervention dangerous for subordinate crew members. She began documenting the incident in her phone's Notes app, recording exact quotes and timestamps that might become crucial evidence in the investigations that would inevitably follow. Her detailed record would later prove essential in establishing the timeline and severity of Morrison's discriminatory actions. Ashley Miller stood paralyzed near the beverage cart, watching her captain destroy his career in real time while remaining powerless to intervene. Her 3 years of experience had not prepared her for witnessing blatant discrimination from airline leadership, nor had her training provided protocols for challenging captain authority when passenger rights were being violated. Carlos Mendoza, supervising boarding from the jet bridge, received Luis Fernandez's alert and immediately began preparing incident reports for his supervisors. His 12 years of gate experience had taught him that situations involving passenger discrimination and captain misconduct required immediate escalation to corporate executives and legal departments. The convergence of social media documentation, crew member reports, and corporate monitoring meant that Zara Williams's quiet confrontation with Captain Morrison was about to explode into a crisis that would reshape Pacific Airways' corporate culture and Morrison's personal future. But neither Morrison nor Patterson had any awareness of the storm gathering around them. They remained focused on their immediate goal, forcing a black woman out of her paid seat to accommodate their personal arrangement, blissfully unaware that their actions were being broadcast to the world and documented for posterity. Zara Williams looked at the screen of her iPhone for exactly 3 seconds before tapping a single icon. The app that opened wasn't available in any public store. Phoenix Command was custom-designed crisis management software that connected her instantly to a team of executives, lawyers, and communications specialists who managed emergencies across her $3 billion empire. The touch activated protocols that had been in development for 48 hours ever since the Pacific Airways acquisition had been finalized. Elena Rodriguez, her chief operating officer, was expecting this call. Marcus Thompson, her general counsel, was standing by with legal documents. Sarah Kim, her director of communications, had crisis management templates ready for immediate deployment. In Morrison and Patterson's view, Zara was simply checking her phone like any other passenger. They had no idea she had just activated the corporate equivalent of a nuclear response technology. "Gentlemen," Zara said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I believe Captain Morrison has some important notifications waiting on his company device." Morrison's tablet secured in the cockpit had been receiving priority alerts for the past 20 minutes. His phone, vibrating intermittently in his pocket throughout the confrontation, contained 17 missed calls from Pacific Airways executives who desperately needed to reach him before he destroyed his career completely. "Ma'am," Morrison said with growing irritation, "my communications are confidential airline business. I don't discuss operational matters with passengers." Patterson laughed, emboldened by what he interpreted as Morrison's professional authority. "Jake doesn't need to check his messages for you, sweetheart. He's got more important things to worry about than whatever corporate nonsense you think you know about." The casual dismissal and condescending endearment were captured by multiple cameras and live-streamed to audiences that had swelled past 20,000 concurrent viewers. David Martinez's TikTok community was sharing clips across platforms faster than Pacific Airways' crisis management team could monitor them. Zara's expression remained perfectly calm as she pressed another icon on her phone. This one activated the emergency override protocols that Phoenix Capital had installed in Pacific Airways' communication technology as part of the acquisition process. In the cockpit, Morrison's tablet screen suddenly illuminated with a priority alert that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. Urgent. Corporate structure change. Pacific Airways. Acquisition complete. New majority owner, Phoenix Capital Partners. New CEO, Zara Williams. Effective date, 72 hours ago. All management changes authorized immediately. The alert included Zara's photograph, her corporate biography, and documentation of her authority over all Pacific Airways operations. A secondary notification required Morrison's immediate acknowledgement before he could access any other aircraft technology. Luis Fernandez, monitoring the situation from the aircraft door, noticed Morrison's sudden confusion when the captain received an urgent call from the cockpit. Co-pilot David Park's voice came over the intercom. "Captain Morrison, please return to the cockpit immediately. We have urgent corporate communications requiring your immediate attention." Morrison looked toward the cockpit, then back at Zara, then at Patterson, clearly frustrated by the interruption to his authority demonstration. "This will just take a moment," he told Patterson. "Don't let her move while I handle whatever crisis management thinks is urgent." Zara smiled. "Captain, I think you should take that call." Morrison strode toward the cockpit with the confident irritation of a man whose authority was being questioned by corporate bureaucrats who didn't understand operational realities. His 22 years of flying had taught him that executives in distant offices rarely understood the practical challenges of managing passengers and maintaining aircraft schedules. Co-pilot David Park met him at the cockpit entrance with Morrison's tablet extended and an expression of complete bewilderment. "Captain, you need to see this immediately. I've never seen alerts like this before." Morrison grabbed the tablet, expecting standard operational updates about weather or routing changes. His eyes scanned the first line of text, then stopped. He read it again, certain his vision was malfunctioning or the message was corrupted. "Pacific Airways acquisition complete. New CEO, Zara Williams." "This can't be right," Morrison muttered, scrolling through the documentation. There was no acquisition announcement. Corporate would have briefed all senior staff about ownership changes weeks in advance. Park handed him a printed communication that had arrived through official channels. "Captain, this came through the secure corporate network 10 minutes ago. Legal department confirmed its authenticity. The woman in seat 2A. She owns the airline now." Morrison stared at the printed documents, his mind struggling to process information that contradicted everything he believed about the situation. Zara Williams, the passenger he had been trying to remove from first class, was identified as the new chief executive officer of Pacific Airways. The woman whose ability to afford premium accommodations he had questioned was worth $3 billion. "No," Morrison said weakly. "This has to be a mistake. Some kind of error. Corporate acquisitions don't happen without advance notice." Park's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Captain, I called headquarters directly. They confirmed the acquisition was completed Tuesday afternoon. The press announcement is scheduled for Monday morning, but employees were supposed to be notified yesterday. Apparently there was a communication breakdown somewhere in the notification process." Morrison's hands began to tremble as the full implications of his behavior crystallized. He had spent the past 15 minutes publicly humiliating his new employer, questioning her right to occupy seats on aircraft she now owned, threatening her with security removal from her own company's plane. "How bad is it?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. Park gestured toward the cabin, where passenger phones continued recording. "Sir, multiple passengers are live-streaming the confrontation. Social media is erupting. The hashtag Pacific Airways shame is trending nationally. Corporate communications is in crisis mode." Morrison looked through the cockpit door toward seat 2A, where Zara Williams sat with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout his attempts at intimidation. She wasn't celebrating his recognition of her authority or gloating about his mistake. She was simply waiting for him to acknowledge reality. Patterson remained beside her seat, oblivious to the transformation that had just occurred. He was scrolling through his own phone, probably checking social media or responding to business emails, completely unaware that his friend's career had just ended. "What do I do?" Morrison asked quietly. Park's expression was grave. "Captain, I think you need to return to the cabin and apologize. Immediately. Before this gets any worse." Morrison nodded slowly, understanding that his next words would determine whether he faced simple termination or more serious legal consequences. He had threatened a passenger with false accusations, attempted to violate her civil rights, and publicly humiliated the woman who now controlled his professional future. Morrison's return to the cabin occurred in slow motion, each step carrying him closer to the complete destruction of everything he had built over 2 decades of flying. His uniform, pressed and polished just hours earlier, now felt like a costume he had no right to wear. David Martinez's TikTok live audience had exploded past 25,000 viewers as word spread about the developing revelation. His comment section moved too quickly to follow, but the sentiment was clear. He's about to find out who she really is. This is the best plot twist ever. Someone's about to lose their job. Justice is coming. Rebecca Thompson's Instagram Live reached 8,000 concurrent viewers as her business-focused audience shared the stream across professional networks. Corporate executives, diversity consultants, and business journalists were watching the confrontation unfold in real time. "Oh my God," Rebecca whispered to her camera as she watched Morrison's face transform from confidence to horror. "He just figured out who she is. Look at his expression. This is about to get very interesting." Tommy Rodriguez's Twitter thread had been retweeted thousands of times as aviation industry insiders and civil rights activists amplified his documentation of the incident. His video footage would later serve as crucial evidence in multiple investigations and legal proceedings. Sarah Johnson continued her voice memo documentation capturing the exact moment when Morrison realized his mistake. 3:31 p.m., Captain returning from cockpit with completely different body language. His face, his pale hands, shaking slightly. He's clearly received information that changes everything. Luis Fernandez watched Morrison approach seat 2A with the slow, deliberate steps of a condemned man walking toward execution. His 15 years of flight experience had never prepared him to witness a captain's authority collapse so completely or so publicly. Maria Santos recognized the signs of a career ending in real time. Morrison's confident swagger had been replaced by defeated resignation. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried none of the authority he had wielded just minutes earlier. Ashley Miller stood frozen near the beverage cart watching her captain approach what she now understood was his professional destruction. Her 3 years of experience had taught her to respect captain authority, but the complete reversal happening before her eyes challenged everything she understood about airline hierarchies. Patterson looked up from his phone as Morrison returned, expecting confirmation that the seating confusion had been resolved and he could claim his reserved spot. "Jake, all set." "Can I get settled in 2A now?" Morrison stopped beside Patterson, his voice barely audible when he spoke. "Greg, we need to leave. Right now." Patterson frowned, confused by his friend's defeated tone. "Leave? What do you mean, leave? You said you'd handle the seating situation." Zara Williams looked up at both men with an expression of calm authority that filled the cabin space between them. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet power of someone who had just been proven completely right about everything. "Gentlemen," she said, "allow me to reintroduce myself properly. I'm Zara Williams, Chief Executive Officer of Pacific Airways. As of Tuesday afternoon, I own this airline, this aircraft, and Captain Morrison's employment contract." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Patterson's mouth fell open. Morrison closed his eyes as if hoping the nightmare would disappear when he opened them. Around the cabin, passengers who had been documenting the confrontation realized they had just witnessed something extraordinary. David's TikTok audience erupted. "She owns the airline plot twist of the century. He's so fired. Karma is beautiful." Rebecca's Instagram viewers watched in amazement as the power dynamic reversed completely. Rebecca did. She just say she owns the airline? That captain's career is over. This is the best thing I've ever seen. She handled that perfectly. Tommy's Twitter followers shared and reshared his updates as the story exploded across social media platforms. Breaking passenger reveals she's the new CEO of Pacific Air captain who tried to remove her from first class now faces termination. This is incredible. Pacific Airways. Shame karma. Israel Patterson recovered from his shock. First, his real estate background providing experience with sudden reversals and unexpected developments. Ms. Williams, I had no idea. Jake didn't mention. This is obviously a misunderstanding. Zara's gaze shifted to Patterson with the cold assessment of someone evaluating a business liability. "Mr. Patterson, your arrangement with Captain Morrison for preferred seating violates multiple federal regulations governing airline operations. Your expectation that paying passengers should be removed to accommodate your personal preferences suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of how my airline operates." Morrison found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Ms. Williams, we didn't know. The notification technology. Zara held up a hand, stopping his attempt at explanation. Captain Morrison, you have 30 seconds to return to the cockpit and prepare for immediate removal from this aircraft. Your resignation will be processed before we reach the gate. The finality in her voice left no room for argument or appeal. Around the cabin, passengers watched in stunned silence as absolute authority shifted from the uniformed pilot to the woman in casual clothes they had just witnessed being humiliated. Morrison's 22-year career ended not with ceremony or gratitude, but with the quiet devastation of a man who had finally met someone with more power than his prejudices could overcome. The transformation in Captain Jake Morrison was visible to every passenger in the first-class cabin. The confident swagger that had carried him through 22 years of commercial aviation evaporated completely, replaced by the hunched shoulders and shuffling gait of a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed. Ms. Williams Morrison began, his voice cracking slightly. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. There seems to be a communication breakdown here that could be resolved professionally. Zara's expression didn't soften. She had built a $3 billion empire by making decisive decisions and following through on consequences. Morrison's behavior hadn't been a simple misunderstanding or communication failure. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate a passenger based on racial bias and personal favoritism. Captain Morrison, she said, her voice carrying throughout the cabin. There's nothing to discuss. You attempted to remove a paying passenger from her seat based on her appearance. You violated federal anti-discrimination laws. You threatened a customer with security removal for the crime of existing while black in first class. David Martinez's TikTok live audience had swelled past 30,000 viewers as news of the CEO reveal spread across social media platforms. His comment section was moving too fast to read, but the overwhelming sentiment celebrated Morrison's downfall. Justice. She ended his whole career. This is why we need more black women in power. Perfect example of karma. Morrison's face had gone completely pale as the reality of his situation crystallized. Ms. Williams, I've been with Pacific Airways for 8 years. My flying record is exemplary. This was a misunderstanding about passenger accommodations, not discrimination. Zara stood not to leave her seat, but to face Morrison directly at eye level. Her calm authority filled the space between them, making his desperation even more obvious by contrast. Captain, let me be very clear about what I witnessed, she said. You told me this seat isn't for people like me. You suggested I would be more comfortable in economy class. You questioned my ability to afford first-class accommodations. You threatened to have me removed by security for the crime of occupying a seat I had legally purchased. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Morrison's mouth opened and closed wordlessly as he realized every statement was documented by multiple cameras and had been broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Luis Fernandez approached from his position near the aircraft door, his expression professional but sympathetic. Captain, I've received instructions from ground control. Airport security is standing by to escort you from the aircraft. Morrison's last vestige of hope died with Luis's announcement. He looked around the cabin desperately as if searching for allies or alternative explanations that might save his career. The faces looking back at him reflected a mixture of satisfaction, pity, and uncomfortable recognition that they had witnessed justice in real time. This is insane, Morrison muttered, his voice barely audible. 8 years of perfect service, and it's destroyed by one passenger accommodation issue. Patterson, who had been standing silently beside Morrison throughout the revelation, finally found his voice. Jake, let's just go. This situation has gotten out of hand. Zara's attention shifted to Patterson with the same cold assessment she had applied to Morrison. Mr. Patterson, your role in this incident is being reviewed as well. Your expectation that passengers should be removed to accommodate your personal preferences will be forwarded to the appropriate regulatory authorities. Patterson's face flushed as he realized his own conduct was under scrutiny. Now, wait just a minute. I'm a paying customer with a long-standing relationship with this airline. Jake and I have had arrangements for years. Arrangements that violated federal aviation regulations. Zara replied calmly. Arrangements that prioritized personal connections over passenger rights. Arrangements that end today. Maria Santos watched the confrontation with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Morrison's removal would eliminate a source of workplace tension that had affected crew morale for years, but she worried about retaliation from other senior staff who shared his attitudes. "Ms. Williams," Maria said quietly, "what should we do about passenger boarding? We have 2 empty seats now, and other passengers are waiting at the gate." Zara's expression softened when she addressed Maria, recognizing the difficult position crew members faced when caught between discriminatory leadership and passenger rights. "Maria, please inform the gate agent that Captain Morrison and Mr. Patterson are being removed from the flight. Co-pilot Park will assume command and will await a replacement captain from the standby roster. Boarding will resume once security has escorted these gentlemen from the aircraft." Morrison's hands began to tremble as the finality of his situation became undeniable. "Ms. Williams, please. I have a family, a mortgage, 22 years of service. Can't we find some middle ground here?" Zara's voice remained steady, but carried no warmth. "Captain Morrison, you had 22 years to learn that passengers deserve equal treatment regardless of their appearance. You chose instead to build a career on bias and intimidation. The middle ground you're looking for doesn't exist." Tommy Rodriguez continued documenting the removal process for his YouTube channel, his Twitter thread now viral across aviation and civil rights communities. "Update security, arriving to escort discriminatory captain from aircraft. New CEO handling this with perfect professional authority. This is how justice looks in 2024. Pacific Airways. Shame Rebecca Thompson's Instagram Live audience watched in fascination as power dynamics played out in real time. This is incredible to witness," Rebecca whispered to her camera. "She's handling this with such calm authority while he's completely falling apart. This is what accountability looks like." Ashley Miller stood transfixed near the beverage cart, watching her captain's authority evaporate completely. Her 3 years of training had taught her that captains were the ultimate authority on aircraft, but seeing Morrison's power stripped away so decisively challenged everything she thought she understood about airline hierarchies. Carlos Mendoza appeared at the aircraft door with 2 airport security officers, their professional demeanor indicating they had been briefed about the situation's significance. The lead officer approached Morrison with respectful but firm authority. "Captain Morrison, I'm Officer Jenkins with LAX Security. We need you to gather your belongings and come with us for debriefing about this incident." Morrison's shoulders sagged with defeat as he realized that resistance would only make his situation worse. "I need to collect my flight bag from the cockpit." "We'll escort you," Sir Officer Jenkins replied. "Mr. Patterson, you'll need to come with us as well for questioning about your role in this incident." Patterson's face reddened with indignation. "My role? I'm a victim here. I was promised a seat that was given to someone else." Zara's voice cut through Patterson's protest with crystalline clarity. "Mr. Patterson, you demanded that a paying passenger be removed from her seat because you assumed she didn't belong in first class. Your victim status is debatable." The security escort began with Morrison retrieving his belongings from the cockpit while passengers continued documenting the unprecedented scene. David's TikTok audience had reached 40,000 viewers as news outlets began covering the viral incident. Sarah Johnson's voice memo captured the exact moment of Morrison's departure, 3:41 p.m. Former captain being escorted from aircraft by security. His face shows complete defeat. Other passengers applauding quietly as he exits. This feels like historical justice happening in real time. Co-pilot David Park emerged from the cockpit to address passengers with professional calm that contrasted sharply with Morrison's earlier aggression. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Captain Park, and I'll be taking command of Flight 447. We apologize for the delay and appreciate your patience as we resolve this situation." The title change from co-pilot to captain illustrated how quickly authority could shift when competence replaced bias. Park's respectful address to passengers demonstrated leadership through service rather than intimidation. Greg Patterson's removal proved even more dramatic than Morrison's, primarily because he remained convinced that his wealth and connections provided immunity from consequences. As security officers escorted him toward the aircraft door, he continued protesting his treatment with increasingly desperate indignation. "This is ridiculous," Patterson declared loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I spend more money with this airline than most passengers make in a year. Jake and I have had arrangements for 5 years without problems. One passenger complaint can't override that relationship." Officer Martinez, the second security officer, maintained professional patience while guiding Patterson toward the exit. "Sir, we need you to come quietly. Your statements are being recorded and may be used in the investigation." Patterson's face reddened as he realized his protests were being documented by multiple agencies and broadcast live to thousands of viewers. "Investigation? For what?" "Requesting a seat upgrade. This is insane." Zara's voice followed him with calm authority. "Mr. Patterson, the investigation will examine whether your expectations of preferential treatment violated other passengers' civil rights. Your assumptions about who belongs in first class will be reviewed by appropriate authorities." The mention of civil rights investigations seemed to penetrate Patterson's indignation for the first time. His real estate business depended on maintaining relationships with diverse clients and avoiding discrimination complaints that could damage his reputation. "Civil rights," Patterson stammered. "I never said anything about race. I just expected the seat I was promised." Tommy Rodriguez's Twitter thread documented Patterson's evolving understanding of his situation. Patterson, now realizing his arrangements with discriminatory captain might have legal consequences. Real estate developer about to learn about fair housing parallels in aviation. Accountability. David Martinez's TikTok audience watched Patterson's departure with satisfaction. Rich white man facing consequences. "We love to see it. His privilege can't save him now. This is what accountability looks like. Record everything." Rebecca Thompson addressed her Instagram Live audience as security, escorted Patterson past her seat. "What you're seeing is someone who's never faced consequences for his biased behavior, suddenly realizing his actions have real-world implications. This is educational for everyone watching." Patterson's final attempt at salvaging the situation revealed the depth of his disconnect from reality. As Officer Jenkins guided him toward the exit, Patterson turned back toward Zara with desperate authority. "Ms. Williams, I understand you're upset about the communication breakdown, but I'm prepared to invest significantly in Pacific Airways' expansion plans. We should discuss this privately before making decisions we might regret." The attempted bribe hung in the air like toxic gas. Passengers shifted uncomfortably as they witnessed someone offering financial incentives to escape consequences for discriminatory behavior. Zara's response was swift and decisive. "Mr. Patterson, your offer to invest in my airline in exchange for overlooking your discriminatory conduct will be included in the regulatory report. Thank you for providing additional evidence of your character." Patterson's face went pale as he realized his attempted solution had created a bigger problem. Securities regulations made bribery attempts serious federal offenses that carried penalties extending far beyond airline incidents. "That's not... I wasn't offering..." Patterson stammered as Officer Martinez guided him firmly toward the exit. Luis Fernandez closed the aircraft door behind the security escort with visible relief. 8 years of working under Morrison's authoritarian leadership had created workplace stress that affected entire crew teams. The captain's removal felt like fresh air entering a stuffy room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Park announced over the intercom, "we're ready to resume boarding. Ground crew is preparing for departure, and we should be airborne within 30 minutes." The cabin atmosphere transformed immediately from tense confrontation to celebratory relief. Passengers who had witnessed discrimination and intimidation tactics now saw justice implemented swiftly and decisively. The immediate cultural shift following Morrison's removal was visible in crew member behavior throughout the aircraft. Maria Santos stood straighter, her professional confidence restored without the constant threat of captain retaliation. Her 8 years of experience had taught her to recognize quality leadership, and Zara's handling of the crisis demonstrated authority based on competence rather than intimidation. Ms. Williams. Maria said respectfully, "Is there anything specific you need from the crew during this transition?" Zara's response illustrated her leadership philosophy perfectly. Maria, I need you and your team to treat every passenger with the dignity and respect they deserve, regardless of their appearance or background. That's not a special request for today. That's how my airline operates every day. The simple clarity of her expectations provided immediate guidance that had been missing under Morrison's arbitrary authority. Crew members understood their responsibilities without confusion about personal preferences or unwritten hierarchies. Luis Fernandez approached Zara's seat with professional respect. "Ma'am, on behalf of the cabin crew, thank you for addressing this situation." Captain Morrison's behavior had been creating workplace tension for months. Zara nodded, recognizing that Morrison's discriminatory leadership had affected employees as well as passengers. Luis' toxic leadership creates toxic culture. We're going to change that throughout the entire organization. Ashley Miller finally found her voice after watching 3 years of captain authority collapse in 30 minutes. "Ms. Williams, will there be retaliation against crew members who witnessed this incident?" Zara's expression was gentle but firm. "Ashley, retaliation against employees who report discrimination is illegal and goes against everything Phoenix Capital stands for. You'll be protected, not punished for doing the right thing." The reassurance transformed Ashley's anxiety into relief. Her limited experience had made her fearful of challenging authority, but seeing leadership that protected rather than punished ethical behavior gave her confidence to speak up in future situations. Captain Park's leadership transition demonstrated competent authority without Morrison's toxic elements. His interactions with crew members were respectful and collaborative rather than commanding and intimidating. "Maria, can you confirm passenger count and secure the cabin for departure Park requested rather than demanded?" Luis, please ensure boarding door is sealed and prepare for taxi. He continued with professional courtesy that had been absent under Morrison's leadership. The contrast between Park's collaborative authority and Morrison's authoritarian intimidation was immediately obvious to crew members who had worked under both leadership styles. Carlos Mendoza returned to the aircraft after completing his incident reports with airport security. His documentation would prove crucial in regulatory investigations and legal proceedings that would follow the discrimination incident. Ms. Williams, Carlos said quietly, "I've filed comprehensive reports about today's incident. The evidence includes passenger testimony, social media documentation, and crew witness statements. The regulatory agencies will have complete records." Zara appreciated Carlos's thoroughness and professionalism. "Thank you, Carlos. Comprehensive documentation ensures this behavior won't be repeated by anyone in our organization." The transformation extended beyond immediate crew members to ground support staff who had witnessed the incident from various positions. Maintenance crews, gate agents, and service personnel had observed Morrison's behavior patterns for months, but lacked authority to address leadership misconduct. Timothy Rodriguez, the lounge attendant who had served Zara earlier, approached the aircraft to express gratitude for her intervention. "Ms. Williams, thank you for addressing problems we've seen but couldn't fix ourselves." The statement revealed how Morrison's discriminatory leadership had created atmosphere where lower-level employees felt powerless to challenge biased behavior from senior staff. Within 40 minutes of Morrison's removal, Flight 447's operational environment had transformed from toxic hierarchy to collaborative professionalism. Crew members worked efficiently without fear of arbitrary criticism. Passengers felt respected rather than judged. The aircraft itself seemed lighter without the weight of Morrison's prejudices. Zara's demonstration that authority could be exercised with dignity rather than discrimination provided immediate cultural change that would extend throughout Pacific Airways operations as word of the incident spread across the airline's workforce. The removal of Morrison and Patterson wasn't just about individual accountability. It was about establishing new standards for how leadership treated people and how organizations responded when those standards were violated. The crisp December air at Denver International Airport carried the scent of snow and possibility as Zara Williams stepped off Pacific Airways Flight 127 from Los Angeles. 6 months had passed since the incident that transformed both her airline and her industry, and the changes were visible in every interaction, every policy, every moment of passenger service. The flight attendant who thanked her for flying Pacific Airways did so with genuine warmth rather than practiced routine. The gate agent who processed her connection smiled with authentic professionalism. The pilots who greeted passengers during boarding showed respect that felt natural rather than forced. Pacific Airways had become a different company entirely. Customer satisfaction scores had soared to industry-leading levels, not because of marketing campaigns or promotional pricing, but because passengers felt genuinely welcome regardless of their appearance, background, or economic status. The airline's Net Promoter Score had jumped 43 points, the largest improvement in aviation industry history. Revenue had increased 34% as word spread about Pacific Airways' transformation. Business travelers chose the airline specifically because they trusted its commitment to equal treatment. Leisure passengers selected Pacific Airways because they felt respected rather than judged. Corporate accounts switched from competitors because diversity-conscious companies wanted to support organizations that practiced inclusive values. The Dignity in Flight initiative that Zara had implemented company-wide became the gold standard for aviation industry training programs. Other airlines studied Pacific Airways' transformation and implemented similar policies. Flight attendant schools revised curricula to emphasize respectful passenger treatment. Pilot training programs added modules about bias recognition and cultural sensitivity. The technology solutions Phoenix Capital had developed for monitoring discrimination became industry standards. FlightWatch, the passenger reporting app, processed thousands of positive reviews monthly alongside occasional discrimination reports that were investigated immediately and resolved transparently. Airport terminals displayed Pacific Airways' dignity. Pledge posters that committed to treating every passenger with respect, regardless of race, gender, age, appearance, or economic status. The pledges weren't marketing material but legally binding commitments monitored by independent auditors and passenger advocacy groups. Flight crews reported dramatically improved workplace satisfaction as toxic leadership patterns were eliminated throughout the organization. Anonymous employee surveys showed 97% satisfaction rates with management support, professional development opportunities, and workplace equality initiatives. The transformation extended beyond Pacific Airways to influence industry-wide changes in aviation culture. The Federal Aviation Administration implemented new reporting requirements for discrimination incidents. The Department of Transportation created passenger rights enforcement mechanisms. Congress held hearings about bias in commercial aviation that led to stronger regulatory oversight. Civil rights organizations partnered with airlines to develop training programs and monitoring technology. Travel advocacy groups created resources to help passengers recognize and report discriminatory treatment. Social media platforms implemented features to streamline discrimination incident documentation and reporting. The winter sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Denver International Airport as Jake Morrison finished his shift driving for a ride-sharing service. His black Toyota Camry, clean but showing wear from constant use, represented the dramatic change in circumstances that had defined the past 6 months. The Federal Aviation Administration had revoked Morrison's commercial pilot license, pending completion of extensive bias training and psychological evaluation. The discrimination incident on Flight 447 had triggered comprehensive review of his employment history that revealed patterns of preferential treatment for certain passengers and subtle intimidation of others. Pacific Airways had terminated his employment for cause, forfeiting his pension benefits and stock options. The airline industry's tight-knit community ensured that news of his discriminatory behavior reached every major carrier, eliminating prospects for future pilot employment. Morrison's personal life had collapsed along with his career. His wife Sandra had filed for divorce after viewing social media footage of his treatment of Zara Williams. She told the court that his behavior revealed character traits she couldn't accept in a life partner. Their suburban home went into foreclosure as legal fees and lost income overwhelmed their financial resources. But the past 6 months had also forced Morrison to confront uncomfortable truths about his attitudes and behavior that he had avoided throughout his flying career. Court-mandated counseling sessions had helped him understand how racial bias had influenced his treatment of passengers and crew members. Sensitivity training had exposed the discriminatory patterns he had rationalized as professional judgment. Morrison's current work as a ride-sharing driver provided daily lessons in treating diverse customers with respect and dignity. His passenger rating averaged 4.8 out of 5 stars, reflecting genuine effort to provide courteous service regardless of pickup location, passenger appearance, or destination. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison that his new livelihood depended entirely on customer satisfaction and respectful treatment of people from every background. Late-night rides from airport terminals reminded him constantly of the career he had destroyed through prejudice and arrogance. His phone app chimed with a new ride request pickup at Denver International Airport, Terminal B, Pacific Airways arrivals. The passenger name showed as Z. Williams with a 5-star rating and premium service preference. Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the ride, wondering if this could possibly be the same Z. Williams, whose life he had tried to derail 6 months earlier. The coincidence seemed too unlikely, but the pickup location and timing matched Pacific Airways' evening arrival schedule from Los Angeles. He drove toward the terminal with growing anxiety, unsure whether he hoped to avoid or confront the woman whose dignity he had attacked so publicly. His counseling sessions had emphasized the importance of accountability and amends-making, but he hadn't imagined facing Zara Williams again so directly. The baggage claim area at Denver International buzzed with typical evening activity as Zara retrieved her luggage from Pacific Airways Flight 127. Her visit to Los Angeles had included meetings with aviation industry executives about expanding the Dignity in Flight program to international carriers. Her phone showed that her ride-sharing driver Rick was approaching in a black Toyota Camry. The app indicated a 4.8-star rating and positive passenger reviews praising his courteous service. Zara appreciated professional transportation that reflected the same respectful standards she had implemented throughout her airline. Morrison spotted Zara immediately as he pulled up to the pickup zone. 6 months had not diminished her calm authority or professional presence. She wore a charcoal wool coat over business attire, checking her phone, while waiting beside her luggage with the same composed confidence he remembered from their confrontation. His heart rate accelerated as he parked and stepped out to help with her bags. This moment represented everything he had lost through his discriminatory behavior, every opportunity destroyed by prejudice he could have chosen to overcome. Ms. Williams Morrison asked quietly, his voice barely audible over airport traffic noise. Zara looked up from her phone, recognizing Morrison immediately despite his civilian clothes and humbled demeanor. 6 months of consequences had aged him visibly, but she also noticed something different in his posture and expression that suggested genuine change rather than practiced remorse. "Hello, Jake," she said simply, using his first name to acknowledge their shared history without hostility. Morrison's hand shook as he reached for her luggage. I didn't know the pickup was for you. I can call another driver if you prefer." Zara studied his face for signs of the arrogance and entitlement that had characterized their previous encounter. What she saw instead was genuine humility, earned through months of consequences and reflection. "That won't be necessary," she said, allowing him to load her bags into his trunk. "It's cold, and I'd like to get home." The 15-minute drive into downtown Denver passed in contemplative silence. Morrison drove with careful precision, following traffic laws exactly, using turn signals for every lane change. His transformation from entitled pilot to respectful service provider was complete and genuine. As they approached Zara's downtown hotel, Morrison finally found his voice. "Ms. Williams, I know this might not mean anything to you, but I need to say I'm sorry. Not just for my behavior that day, but for every passenger I treated poorly based on my biases." Zara listened without interrupting, recognizing authentic accountability rather than self-serving apology. I've learned things about myself over the past 6 months that I should have confronted years ago. Morrison continued. I destroyed my career, my marriage, my life, but I also hurt people who didn't deserve to be judged by my prejudices. The car stopped in front of Zara's hotel as Morrison concluded his statement. She sat quietly for a moment, considering his words and the genuine remorse she heard in his voice. Jake, she said finally, you were an excellent pilot. Your technical skills were never in question. But leadership isn't about flying aircraft, it's about serving people with dignity and respect. Morrison nodded, understanding the distinction that had eluded him throughout his aviation career. The position you lost can't be restored, Zara continued, but the person you're becoming through this experience might be more valuable than the pilot you used to be. She handed him a $50 tip through the app, rating his service 5 stars with a comment about his professional courtesy and respectful treatment. As Zara walked toward the hotel entrance, Morrison sat in his car watching her disappear into the lobby. For the first time in 6 months, he felt something approaching peace. Her words hadn't offered forgiveness or redemption, but they had acknowledged his potential for growth and change. Morrison's phone chimed with the tip notification and passenger review. The comment read, "Courteous driver who understands that true service comes from treating everyone with dignity. Highly recommend." He stared at the screen, realizing that the woman whose life he had tried to diminish with prejudice had just offered him encouragement for becoming a better person. Her grace didn't erase his mistakes, but it provided hope that redemption remained possible through continued effort and changed behavior. Driving away from the hotel, Morrison looked up through his windshield at the lights of a Pacific Airways jet climbing steadily through the night sky. The aircraft represented everything he had lost through discriminatory choices, but it also symbolized the inclusive culture he had inadvertently helped create through the consequences of his actions. 6 months after attempting to remove Zara Williams from seat 2A, Jake Morrison finally understood that true authority came from lifting people up rather than putting them down. That real leadership served others rather than demanding deference, and that dignity was not determined by appearance, but by how we choose to treat each other. The circle was complete. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through transformation that protected future travelers from experiencing the discrimination that had once been tolerated as normal business practice. Pacific Airways continued climbing toward excellence, carrying passengers who knew they belonged in any seat they could afford, served by crews trained to recognize that respect was not a privilege to be earned, but a right to be honored, guided by leadership that understood power was most powerful when used to protect rather than privilege. And in the ride-sharing economy of Denver, a former pilot continued learning daily that treating people with dignity was not just good business practice, but the foundation of human decency itself. Thanks for watching. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, remember Zara's story. Quiet dignity changes everything. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story moved you, and smash that subscribe button for more powerful stories of justice and karma. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because every voice matters in the fight for dignity and respect. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the power of standing your ground with grace. We'll see you in the next one.